To Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 197. And before we get started, a quick reminder, please follow Identity Office Hours on live stream on YouTube or LinkedIn. That really helps us. The topic today, we're back to AI, and the topic today is defining the AI agent taxonomy. Our guest today is Danny Zollner, Senior Identity Standards Architect at Okta. Welcome, Danny.
Thanks. Hi. Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the episode, it's traditional for first-time guests to sort of introduce themselves. So tell us a little bit about your career trajectory.
Sure. So I went to school for, I ended up getting a degree in government and politics at the University of Maryland, which is political science without the quantitative stuff, because who needs that? And by the time I graduated, I realized I didn't want to work in government. And I had worked help desk when I was in college. So that transitioned into my first IT job at a managed services IT company, a little bit of, jack of all trades. I was there for a few years, and then through what ended up being a really fortunate series of events, I ended up losing a job offer that I had already put in my notice for. Ended up then moving partway across the country in the United States, and a couple weeks later got an interview and then started a role at Microsoft in the customer support organization for Azure Active Directory. So I was there for a couple of years. And then I had a chance to jump into the identity, or now it's identity and network access division as a product manager. I over the probably about 5 years that I was at Microsoft in that capacity, the role changed over time, but it was usually focused on third-party integrations, so stuff like SSO, provisioning. I ended up sort of going way down the rabbit hole on provisioning in particular, and if anybody watching has ever heard of me before, it's probably in the context of Skim. And then last year, I left Microsoft, and the beginning of this year in 2026, I started at Okta as an identity standards architect.
Nice. So as I mentioned, we'll pivot into the topic. I feel like 4 out of 5 episodes this year are about AI, which is probably not surprising. But you wrote an article, I think it came out yesterday or the day before, and it's in the homework, by the way. And every episode at IOH has a geeky wiki page. And so I'll just put that up for a second. It's always glue.co/IOH- the episode number. So IOH-197. So anyone who wants to read this article, it's in the homework section. And I have to say, there's a lot in that article I really agree with. And I really agree with the premise that we need a shared taxonomy. And Microsoft's sort of famous for taxonomies too, by the way. I don't know if you know that it's kind of a joke, but Microsoft seems to love their taxonomies. But before we even dive into that, what is a taxonomy? I just want to make sure everyone, this is a fancy English word, and I just want to make sure everybody actually knows what a taxonomy is. So what is a taxonomy?
I don't know if I'm going to do as good a job as a dictionary, but I guess to put it in a really simple sentence, naming conventions and just how we're thinking about almost what is a thing. So using animals as an example, you've obviously got dogs, but then you have what different breeds or I guess breeds is the right word, of dogs. You've got I don't know, a terrier and a Great Dane and all that. And if we're trying to talk about something like an agent, it's really helpful to have set some sort of baseline where you can go in with a default assumption that everybody's perception of or their own definition, I guess, of what an agent is pretty much the same. Otherwise, you end up with two different people talking about agents, but they think of them as very different things. So like I look at things from sort of an identity lifecycle, a governance standpoint from my background, and somebody that's a little more, I don't know, in like the software engineering side might look at things more from a like the like individual instances that spin up, or like sub processes, whatever you want to call it. If you think of things like spiffy, or just like just-in-time provisioning, scaling something in it like up and down based on demand. And if the like instance that of whatever you're spinning up only lasts for 5 minutes or whatever, and you might have 1 minute and 20 the next based on demand. And if you think of that as an agent, and then I think of it as like what is like sort of like a high level like this is the entire this is the blueprint, or this is the template that all those little ones might spawn off of. But
Yeah.
if we're
Well,
not
we're
talking about
diving
the same
in
level.
before we dive into the to the topic. Maybe I'll volunteer a definition. Um, and I don't know, would it be right to say that a taxonomy is sort of like a shared vocabulary, or a
Yeah.
shared agreed on vocabulary? That
Yeah.
And I find that, I mean, as a native English speaker, I love English, and they say English has a lot of words, but sometimes I feel like there aren't enough words because we end up reusing words. And I say one word, I say agent, for example, to use your example, and I think of one thing, and you say agent, and you think of another thing, and we actually are not communicating because we're using the same words, but we have different meanings in our mind for what those words mean. And so I think when I was reading your article, it seemed like what you were getting at is that it's important that we have this shared vocabulary, and that we have agreement on what are the words that we're going to use and what are the meanings of those words, so that we know that we're aligned when we move to more complicated like topologies and architectures. It's important that we're aligned on the meaning. Am I in the right ballpark, you think?
Yeah, no, that was a much more cleanly stated definition than the one that just came out of my mouth.
Yeah, I remember. I do. You mentioned the biology, and I remember something from 10th grade biology, like maybe I'm thinking of phylogeny. I can't remember what that said. Maybe it wasn't taxonomy. I don't know. I think a taxonomy is one of these fancy words that normal people don't normally use, but
Yeah.
but right. I think you were talking also about the taxonomy of like the species taxonomy, how we're going to have genus and species and family, and so we're going to have to name animals all in the same way, so we make sure we know that when I say this animal, we know we're talking about the same animal. So it works. You could say it works the same way, just like in biology, we need to be clear about like what species we're talking about. In tech, we also need to know like really clearly, well, I guess, what species of tech we're talking about, especially if we're going to have interoperability, because if we're talking about multiple domains or vendors collaborating, it's really important. Just as an aside, I sometimes wish we would make up new words. Like Shakespeare made up a lot of new words. But now it seems like it's like not in vogue to make up new words anymore. But we have a lot of root words, so hypothetically we could make up new words. But then people seem to be anti making up new words now, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I guess like it still happens occasionally. I'm not sure when exactly it went out of style, but maybe Identirati slipped in right before it became like unfashionable.
Yeah, and I did not make up Identirati. I heard it first from Steve Wilson, but I think Steve Wilson said he heard it from somebody else, or maybe Steve Wilson made it up. Actually, I wanted to issue verifiable credentials. I wanted to issue an Identirati card, and that way, one of my goals was to mint more Identiratis, because there was a couple of Identiratis like Ian Glazer or Eve Mailer, like people who you always see at these conferences, right? And I was like, we need to mint more Identiratis. And so part of the goal, the reason I named it Identirati Office Hours is so that we could say, you are now an Identirati because you are an Identirati Office Hours. But I haven't found a good issuer. Maybe Okta does this, but I haven't found a good issuer for those cards. One day I'm going to find a good issuer, and somebody will tell me what wallet I can issue it into, and how I issue a verifiable credential into a wallet. Or maybe I could use MOSIP NG wallet, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, back to our topic. Okay, so now I want to read you back something you said from your article, right in the beginning of the article. And you said, the absence of a clear shared taxonomy for AI agents is a provisioning and governance problem that's only going to get harder to address the longer it goes unresolved. So I actually wanted to ask you about, so one of my pet sort of projects is on governance. And so you're saying we need a shared taxonomy because provisioning and governance is going to get harder. So I want to sort of start, before we move into AI agents, what do you mean by governance?
So I don't think it's the same definition that you frequently talk about governance with. I was there for part of a session that you held at IIW a few weeks ago on what was it?
GovOps.
GovOps. I remember the Gov part. That was the easy one. It's more the I guess the actions in the process from a technical enforcement standpoint. So something like an access review process, let's say. It's partially based in configuration, partially maybe based in like a person manually approving, or if it's not something that auto approves through configuration, recurring like every couple weeks, months, whatever, depending on the access in question, getting reapproved, or attested that yes, I or this principal needs this access and we still needs it. And I'm saying, I said it last month, but this month they still need it. And yeah, so I guess that's what I think of governance as.
Yeah. So I'm Hassler in chief sometimes. So I feel like if we're going to say, in order to achieve governance, we need to have a taxonomy, I would say we almost need to start by saying what that governance is, and why do we need it. And I think that there's a couple of words out there that really are used a lot by the industry, and governance is one of them. Policy is another one. Like, policy can mean anything these days.
Mm-hmm.
And governance is another one. But I really feel like we need to be more precise when we talk about governance, what we actually mean the goal is. Because if the goal is we need a taxonomy in order to get governance, it's important that we're clear on what governance is.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go beyond that, because I don't want to spend the whole time talking about governance. You have a very controversial assertion in your article, and your core idea basically is that an agent, the core requirement for an agent is that it's persisted. And I want to dig into this idea a little bit. And so I guess my first question is, are you basically implying that there's a one-to-one relationship between an agent and a client ID?
I don't think that there has to be, no. There can be, but I don't think it's a requirement.
So when you say, it's almost like, that saying, like, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, did it really happen? I wonder if it's like, if the agent exists, is it not an agent until it registers in some domain and gets a domain specific identifier? It's like, I just wonder, it seems like a weird thing to say, like, you're not real agent until you actually um, register with some domain, and then some information about you gets persisted in that domain's database.
Yeah, and so I the angle that I approach that from, and I think even like the definition um, doesn't extend globally to like any usage of the word agent, let's say. But thinking more of like I guess just in the like context of identity and access management, like I guess lifecycle management. I won't say governance, even though well, besides right there. Um, um, the I guess the need for so the reason that I think that there's a need for persistence is that if you're going to be managing or like auditing, so whether it's purely just like observing and discovering and reporting back somewhere, or actively, I guess, handling the full life cycle, like create or update, disable, delete, uh, if and if like the principle or whatever, if like the identity record, we'll call it, for whatever that entity is, uh, isn't persisted for like some length of time, that pretty much it. I guess it's like it needs to be non-ephemeral, if that makes sense. Because if we look at like sort of what is an agent and start trying to from an identity governance, like yeah, I said the word, but
You can use
um,
governance. It's
yeah,
okay.
I'm playing, but uh, but so if we're trying to, I guess, apply like a lot of the same principles that have been used for years for managing other like sort of identity objects,
Humans.
users, groups,
Humans.
humans, pretty much, and sort of very like lacklusterly uh, other like non-human identities until now. Uh, as an industry, we don't do a great job of that, like across domains, I feel like. But if we're trying to like manage something that is ephemeral and it's sort of like its existence is like gated on like let's say the completion of a task or like some conditions, right? Then I think a lot of these like reasons to exist, we'll call it, uh, for an agent would be so like flash in the pan that the when we think of the I guess the like the speed and the cadence that a lot of identity lifecycle management, identity governance processes work through, they tend to be a little slower. Like if you think with users, the like I guess series of events from like bringing on a user and there exists in the HR system, and slowly like trickle down into like the IDP and then into downstream apps or whatever. It's like hours and on a good day. In some cases, certain changes, if they need like some like little side route approval or whatever, it might be days. Um, and trying to manage the like access that those have, or sorry, that agents have, um, if the thing that we're thinking of as this is an agent only might last for 5 seconds, it's too quick to actually like do anything with. And for those sort of like flash in the pan ephemeral entities that are going to pop up, if they're not being managed through some sort of like identity access management governance policy framework, they're probably inheriting that from some sort of template. Like they have some relation to something that says this is these are the the permissions or the entitlements that you have. This is the like I guess there's probably going to be I don't know like a lower and an upper like bound. Like you might not need every scope if we're putting in like OAuth terms, but you have the potential to request a token with a certain like stronger scope or whatever. But if we ended up on like in some definition of an agent where it can be something that lives for 5 seconds or even 5 minutes, then it it's too fast for human involvement essentially. And in a lot of cases, even just for like automated involvement, depending on like I don't know, sort of how much uh, bandwidth there is with a lot of like the infrastructure in place, just the amount of like traffic that would potentially generate. Um, like I don't think it works. And because all those little ephemeral, flashes are, if they're not going through like the some more like centralized decision making process, they've got to be inheriting it, like their permissions from something. And at that point, really, that's what we're managing and governing.
Well, clearly, the industry is challenged to um, to let's say authorize agents properly, and we see there's universally like struggling enterprises are struggling to control access to agentic behavior, and then that's why 4 out of 5 episodes in Identity Office Hours are about this topic. I wanted to pedal back before we get into entitlements. So let's say how do we specify what an agent can do? I still want to focus on the agent identity part.
Mhm.
And you made an interesting point about humans having, let's say, an onboarding process that's slow, um, and that we have software that non-agentic software that we have been assigning identities to, maybe something like an API or an IDP or a relying party might have software identity. And then you have agentic identity. And I wanted to focus on the difference between software identity and agent identity. And do you think that we need a different entity type for agents? And if so, why? Because it's just a piece of software, right? So, what's special about agents that require agents to have a new entity type versus just, let's say, a generic piece of software?
Uh, I don't have a strong opinion on like. I think I'm absolutely right on this, but for like in my opinion, it's the sort of like the risk. Um, Agentic, I don't know, like software, AI is sort of unpredictable, especially when there's so many, I don't know, new like attack vectors. There's things like prompt injection, context poisoning, um, where if you have uh, like a workload identity, a service principal, or whatever for a piece of software that let's say you or your organization or whoever has written, you have a clear like you can generally tell what the logic is, barring some sort of like the design flaw, security issue, whatever. Where this is like what it's going to do because you can look at the code and you can go version the code and all that. And LLMs and I've like read a bit about SLMs, small language models that are starting to pop up. But like there's, I guess AI models are more unpredictable. There's a little bit of like I don't know, like magic, like black box where
Not determinism, let's say.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying that agents are maybe or software in the past was more the functions that it might do are more discrete and definable and predictable, whereas agents could do anything like people, and therefore they're a different type of agent or different type of software. I'm on board with agents being a new type of entity. Um, but I sort of like to flesh out the idea why. Um, and let's talk a little bit about identifiers. CIMD, CIMD,
Mhm.
is very popular in the agentic space because one of the challenges with agentic software is crossing domain boundaries. So if you're crossing domain boundaries, um, it's important that you use a correlatable identifier. And if you get an identifier in each domain, it might be difficult to actually, um, correlate something that happens in your third-party ecosystem that this agent might have performed. So, um, how do you see, looking at the identifier itself, um, um, what's wrong with an agent basically asserting its own identifier, and wouldn't that mean that technically the agent might register or have persisted entities in more than one domain? And I guess I'm pushing back on your idea that the agent doesn't exist until it exists. If an agent can exist in more than one domain, why doesn't it exist before it hits the first domain?
I think, like, to draw a comparison to like users and like user lifecycle management. Um, in I think the vast majority of cases, there's some sort of source of truth for an organization will have, like an HR platform, and the user doesn't exist in, let's say, the identity provider or whatever, like the directory is that an organization has, until the employee or the human or the person, it's some record that, like, a new hire doesn't necessarily translate like one employee record in HR to one user in your IDP. Like, you might have multiple, I don't know, like regions or like sovereign clouds or whatever. You've got the whole like daily driver account versus, have a separate account for privileged actions, that sort of thing. But you can have a user, or I guess not even a user, a human that exists, but it's not a user until it goes into, like, it's through a provisioning process essentially. And I so, like, the agent equivalent, or like the employee record, we'll call it, for the agent, it exists somewhere. Like, in a lot of cases, it's probably not going to start in the IDP or in like the identity governance layer, whatever software is doing that stuff. But if it's if an agent's coming out through one of the, like, agents, platforms, what AWS Bedrock, for instance, then it's an agent there, I guess. So, like, the idea, so I guess actually I think the agent would exist, like, still. I think I just talked myself out of my own point, possibly. But
Well, that's what this is for. So
yeah,
that's totally legit. Yeah.
like the agent can still exist even if it doesn't, like, exist yet in the IDP or in the central directory or whatever. Like, if there's a record that exists at rest essentially, and isn't going to go poof once, hey, book me flights in a hotel to Identiverse, if that's the task that it's bound on. Like, if there's going to be some record that persists past that, like, if it's like a travel booking assistant agent, then it's not going to just go away after it's done its one little task. If you've ever seen, or if any of the people viewing have ever seen the TV show Rick and Morty, there's a concept of this, I don't know, magical creature, whatever. I can't remember the lore of Mr. Meeseeks, but there's a box, essentially. You hit a button on top of it, and this little blue man pops out and it says, "I'm Mr. Meeseeks, look at me." And he has to be given a task, and they don't exist before they're, like, summoned and given the task. And the moment they complete the task, they just poof away. And also, because Rick and Morty is sort of, like, dark and edgy, existence is pain for the Mr. Meeseeks. So all they want to do, their driving force in life, is to finish their task so they can stop existing. But if the agent, like, if whatever's running is like a Mr. Meeseeks and it's going to go away, then, like, where is it getting its initial, like, permissions or whatever from? Like, it has to be getting it delegated or, like, on behalf of, from somewhere else.
Yeah. I think this is at the heart. Actually, your example of the human is a good one. The human definitely exists. Before I get hired at Acme Incorporated, I exist definitively before. Then I get hired at Acme, and now they create a record for me, and I exist in the context of Acme, and Acme knows about me, and maybe Acme gives me some roles, and those roles enable me to access some entitlements. I can view certain folders in the file server, and I can maybe get to certain parts of certain websites, right? But the
Yeah.
human definitely exists before it becomes an account at the enterprise. I think agents in the same way exist. Um, but the hard question you're raising is not does the agent really exist, but how do we know, how do we authorize the agent to do stuff?
Yeah.
And um, and so the view that I'm hearing a lot in the industry, and when I say a lot, I mean every firm out there seems to be pushing some type of agent identity product, and and so they're creating a lot of silos and different approaches to this. But I fundamentally think they're all broken because they're trying to treat agents like people, where you create an agent, you assign it roles, and those roles map to entitlements. And I question if that is actually the right metaphor or the right workflow for controlling security. But just to be clear, that is the metaphor or sort of the workflow that you're suggesting, that an agent identity gets created in an enterprise, and then we provision or authorize that agent for certain roles, and then based on those roles, we can set entitlements. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. And to draw another parallel, like a lot of the way that I'm approaching this draws from how we've traditionally been doing, all this stuff with humans and with users. But an agent based on sort of the platform that it's spun up in, the like organization that it's deployed from, whoever like the human that deploys it is, or so just any other like property or attribute really, it's probably going to have some form of birthright like access. Like any agent that the I don't know, the sales department spins up may have the ability to like sign in to the CRM system. It may not start off birthright with the ability to read any records of any particular customers or sales or anything, but that can then be delegated out, and it may also then get a mailbox or like some identity in your meeting software like Zoom to go. Let's say it's going to help schedule meetings with potential customers. But then beyond the birthright, every use case, every like identity, every agent, it's not going to need the same access. So the one that's dealing with Western U.S. customers probably only going to be like delegated access to that set of records. There's no reason to give it anything else if you're trying to approach things with a like a principle of least access or least privilege mindset. And given how easily persuaded social media has made me believe that agents can be, uh, I think giving them as little access as possible to whatever they need to do their task and not an inch more is generally the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, no question. And in fact, what we're seeing is the exact opposite. That not only are we not employing least privilege, but people are giving them their credentials, allowing agents to impersonate humans with all the privileges that human has. And so what we have is not only not least privilege, but actually the OAuth anti-pattern, because the whole point of OAuth was don't share your credentials, don't expose your credentials to third parties, because then you could be impersonating. And then what are we doing? We're giving a piece of software our credentials. So not only is it not least privilege, it's actually activating the anti-pattern. And so that's obviously bad. Um, but I want to actually push back a little bit, a little bit more existentially on your assertion, and say the current system that we have of RBAC, does it really work?
Um, Not particularly well. The status quo of like managing entitlements, permissions, whatever for users uh, has been like good enough, and like if if there's not like better options out there, like you can't really what's the saying, get blood or water like out of a stone. Um, and with these sort of like very like I don't know, multi-domain or multi-system, you've got nowadays so many things are like as a service. You've got at least one probably like central directory IDP, dozens or hundreds or thousands of apps that are all probably hosted in different places. They've all got their own infrastructure behind them, their own APIs, like their own limitations, their own rate limits on the APIs, and trying to like take some sort of like central decision or set of decisions on policy, uh, and decide that okay, this human or this any sort of like entity at the end of the day needs these permissions, and you then sort of like uh, customize it out to the 1,000 different places that it's going to have some representation. It's there's I don't know, just like fundamentally it's like it's all built on uh, slower like functioning uh, models, I guess. Like if you look at the rate limits on a lot of the big SaaS and IaaS and all the other as a service places for their APIs, especially the identity management APIs, you're looking at maybe it's 25 requests per second to like a skim endpoint, maybe it's 100, but like even with humans, when you start factoring in things like group memberships, just the normal churn in like the IDP directory for a mid to large size organization can sometimes like you end up with that like I Love Lucy, Lucy in the Chocolate Factory thing where there's the conveyor belt of all the chocolates coming and the person put them in the box and they can't, so there's like eating them and like stuffing them in their apron and everything, but they're just the normal flow that like is probably never going to stop, other than I don't know, like the occasional federal holiday or whatever for a US company, or just like something where like nobody's working and there's going to be way less volume of changes for that one day or that one week or whatever. Like a lot of these systems just like they're barely handling, if they're even fully handling that, like the normal churn of like lifecycle management and like very coarse grained like entitlement management. And then when you start getting into finer grained stuff, the like, hey, I'm gonna go grant you this thing, but you only need it for a few minutes, so we're gonna take it away half an hour later, or whatever. Like the volume of traffic that like increases from that, like most of the vendors out there just aren't in a position to handle that, and like it's a really foundational problem that can't go on much more. Like people were sort of like like very like they weren't thrilled about it, I guess, but they were like, okay, well, this is the state of things. What else are we going to do for doing that with users? And users, move a lot slower than agents, and like software does essentially. But this is
Yeah.
roughly actually the topic of my session at Identiverse in 2 weeks of not specifically with an AI spin, but how I guess managing like entitlements, managing permission, managing identity at a more like rapid pace isn't particularly realistic right now because of just how everything is architected.
And what day is your talk actually at Identiverse?
I believe it is on Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay. So less than a week. 6 days from now.
Or no, because Identiverse isn't next week; it's the week.
Oh, you're right. It's a week and a week, 13 days.
Yes.
You're right. My head is already. I'm already out of Identiverse. I forgot about next week entirely. Yes, thank goodness it's not next week. So okay, your answer was actually like more convincing than I thought it would be. Like you convinced me that actually this existing pattern we have is problematic of granting humans roles and mapping them to entitlements around a bunch of SaaS applications, which maybe can't handle the velocity of change if we need to make it. So I think you made a pretty compelling argument that that this existing pattern that we have isn't working so great. I would also point out that IGA, that good IGA rollouts are approaching like 40 to 50% of applications. So there's a bunch of applications that just like don't really work with IGA governance anyway. And so the project to extend IGA out everywhere, generally stalls out at about half the applications. So my question is if we have this sort of broken system of how we're entitling users, why do we think that rolling this out to software and agents where there's going to be more of them and a higher velocity of change, why do we think that this is going to scale when it didn't scale for humans, or didn't, if it didn't work for humans, why is it going to work for agents?
I don't know that it will, just like as things sit today. So you can see, I'm an identity standards architect, little words there on the corner. This is one of the like dozen or more things that I'm trying to like figure out something to go, write a draft, throw it at the IETF. I think the way that roles and entitlements are, designed in the SCIM 2.0, like as it stands today, are almost unusable, like for anything beyond like super coarse grained, like things like, admin as your role. Like it starts falling apart. But I think the what do you call it? The current model doesn't really work, but nobody's ever been incentivized enough to go and try to fix it when it was just users. It was like, good enough. And I think the like incoming, or well, I guess we're already wherever we are in the like AI revolution, is probably going to be the catalyst to at least try to fix a lot of these things that have been broken for a long time, but just not broken enough to make like enough people trying to fix it.
Yeah. So on those veins of trying new things, I'll get on my soapbox for 1 second, and I'll give you last thoughts because we're right at 41 minutes. This conversation went too fast. I wanted to get a little bit deeper, but one of the things I'll say is that I think that I had this sort of existential like moment of like challenge where I was like, oh my God, I've been doing identity all my life. And it turns out identity doesn't really matter. It's not that important. It doesn't work. Um, and I realized that actually I was trying to project the wrong requirements onto identity. That if you look at identity and you say, we have this sort of narrative of who are you and what are you allowed to do? And that narrative is so pervasive in our industry that it's almost hard to question it. But if I do just go ahead and question it and say the point of identity is not to say what you're allowed to do. The point of identity is to hold you accountable when things go wrong. So identity might be useful to authorize you to do a certain action on a certain resource. Like the fact that you're a manager might be the key information to decide to give you access, but the attributes of the person might have nothing to do with whether or not we should give you access. Maybe the fact that you're an employee at a trusted third party is enough. I don't even need to know who you are. All I need to know is that you work for this trusted third party and therefore you should get access to the work site. And I don't even need to know any claims about the human. So the big breakthrough that I had recently was that I realized that my life hadn't been for nothing, even though I've dedicated the last 30 years to identity. Because even if identity wasn't capable of answering, are you authorized to do this? But because the key is that the key question for identity is not what are you allowed to do, but it's that can we hold you accountable when things go wrong? And so I think that we really need to reorient identity around authorization should be based on capabilities. That's the core tenet of GovOps. And identity is still really, really important, but not for the reason that we thought. The reason that identity is important is because without identity, we can't hold the humans, software, business units, and third parties accountable. All of those things have identifiers. And if they don't have identifiers, we won't know who to call when things go wrong. And so if we reorient ourselves around realizing that the point of identity is not authorization, then I think we could really discover the superpower of identity and how we get excellent at identity without having trying to boil the ocean of figuring out how to map entitlements to the identity claims of humans or software. So that's my soapbox. And I'll let you respond to that, and or combine that with your last thoughts, or just tell us about your Identiverse talk in your to wrap up. Um,
Yeah, so I'll respond to your to what you just said, which I'm not sure that I agree with uh, what you said. I think uh, identity is important for um, allowing authorization decisions to be made, in that you like if you look at like the IDP or whatever, the IDP probably isn't directly going to be saying what whether or not a user or whoever is authorized to go do X in some downstream application, but it's going to have enough information that it can provide it to the downstream application. Things, like departments and entitlements, like roles, which are all just fancy like tags to say, this person has this thing, and you can sort of uh, what is it, like transitively, like I don't know if that's the right word, but like there's a relationship of, if you have the role admin, like what that actually means in some downstream app is completely up to the app, but you can know that the role admin means these things based on uh, documentation, just based on just like your general baseline of the world. But
yeah, and
yeah.
I'm not saying that that the claims of the human might not be important. They could be key. They could be determinative of whether or not access should be granted. But but they're optional. They might be not needed, but they might not. And that means if they might not, then we have to figure out how we can build authorization systems that account for all the use cases, including the use cases in which the claims of the human are important. Um,
Mhm.
so unfortunately, we have to conclude. Before we do that, I want to announce the next episode. Emily Lauber is going to give a talk about mix-up attacks in MCP, based on a talk she gave on the MCP summit, which happened last, I think, February or March in New York City. But it was a great talk. I attended it. One of my favorite talks from the MCP summit. So please join us. Quick reminder. I already reminded you at the beginning, but if you missed that one or you didn't do it, please follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube. That really, really helps us. And with that, Danny, thank you so much for volunteering for this and for accepting my challenges to your article. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Like I don't know or think that I'm right on a lot of things, but you gotta have an opinion in order for people to tell you you're wrong. So
Yeah, and that's the point of this thing. We're pushing the rock up the hill a little bit. I think
mhm.
that this is a societal, cultural challenge with this digital transformation. I don't think any of us, any vendor, any expert has the answer right now. And I think the collision and maybe combination of some of these ideas will help us push the ball up the hill a little bit for the next generation, because I'm not even sure our generation is going to figure it out. I'm very pessimistic about this, but we
Yeah.
will see.
Yep.
Um,
But, yep. Thanks for having me.
and thank